U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are meeting in Alaska later today.
I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not.
So these two leaders will be looking at what concessions are needed to end the war in Ukraine. But this meeting will be happening without Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. So what does all of that mean? Joining me with more on what we can expect from the talks is Oleksiy Drachevich. He's an assistant professor of history at Western University. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So President Trump has said any major agreement will likely involve swapping land. What would that look like? And is that a real possibility?
So most likely, if there would be any sort of territorial swaps, we've seen, for example, Trump suggest at one point there were rumors that the United States would recognize Crimea as Russia, which would be a notable policy shift for the United States. For the Russian government, they want essentially Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. These were the regions that were they annexed in September of 2022. Even though they don't occupy the entirety of those regions, they want to have full control of those regions, and that has been a aim for the Russian government. Pretty much for the last 3 years, they haven't moved on that at all. If there were territorial swaps, one would assume that would be what they would be wanting to get out of it. Obviously, Ukraine is not willing to accept anything like that, especially to that scale. That would be roughly 20% of its territory. And on top of that, that would also then condemn many of the Ukrainians that are living there when we know the harshness of Russian occupation. So is it a realistic possibility? At some point, Ukraine might have to then agree to some sort of territorial swap, but to just focus on the territory and not the people living there, that's what's going to make it very complicated going forward. That's what Ukraine is focusing much more on.
I want to ask you a little bit more about that region, the Donetsk region. This is an area that contains what's known as a fortress belt of heavily fortified cities. If President Putin is, let's say, in a scenario, if he was able to get that, when we think about the future security of Ukraine and Ukraine's ability to defend itself, what would that mean for Ukraine?
It would be a significant problem. But basically, it would make it, we've heard, for example, American leaders suggest that even if there was an agreement, some sort of territorial swap, down the road that maybe Ukraine could potentially then get that territory back, it would make it very difficult for that to be the case, one. Two, it would also, even just Russia controlling these territories, when they initially were involved in trying to take these territories, first with Crimea, then with Donetsk and Luhansk, in 2014, the aim was to destabilize the Ukrainian government. And that was a big factor in why then the Ukrainian government agreed to the Minsk protocols and things like that. And ultimately, we still believe that that is the main goal for the Russian government today. They want to destabilize Ukraine, or they want a Ukraine that is favorable to them. And so if Donetsk then, for example, is occupied, again, when we talk about things like lasting peace, Russia controlling Ukrainian territory and Ukraine wanting to liberate that territory, that does not go away with territorial swaps. In fact, it then entrenches that as sort of the new security realities and the new geopolitical realities going forward.
And let's talk about intention, because President Zelensky has warned President Trump that Vladimir Putin isn't actually interested in ending this war. So if that is true, then why would Putin attend the summit in the first place?
So the easy answer there is one, that Putin and the Russian government have wanted to sort of be seen as equals to the United States for quite some time. And so when we go back even to earlier this year when we had the Saudi meeting between the Americans and the Russians, in fact, when we're looking at the roster of who's going to be on each side later today, the rosters look very similar. And just even when we're looking at who at least the Kremlin has released, Vladimir Medinsky, who is the leader of the Ukraine talks that were happening in Turkey, he's not present, which suggests that this is being seen as a meeting between Russia and the United States. There are beliefs that Russia would love to go back to a world where it and the United States, for example, much like during the Cold War, was involved in sort of, again, policing the world in a variety of ways and basically could dictate terms. Ultimately, for Putin, I have to think that this is already a victory, having this meeting on American soil and being seen as an equal to the United States, even when we're looking at what some reporters in Russia are saying they're seeing this as a potential first step from Russia and the United States, namely the United States being pulled away from the transatlantic partnership with Europe. So there's a lot of things that are being read into, and ultimately for Putin, it is a optical victory, and that sort of equality in terms of diplomacy is something that he very much wants.
We're looking at right now a live shot we're showing our viewers of the plane, Air Force One in Maryland, set to depart shortly as this, this summit is happening later this afternoon. I want to ask you really quickly, on Thursday, President Trump said he wants today's talks to set the table for a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. I mean, what are the chances of that happening?
I'll believe it when I see it.
Right.
I would be surprised if anything like that happens, for the simple reason being that Putin and the Russian government have been very consistent that they don't see Zelensky as a legitimate leader. They have consistently delegitimized his government and, frankly, the Ukrainian government since 2014, since the Euromaidan protests. And so that has not seriously changed, nor has, again, Russia's willingness to pull back on any of its maximalist demands. And ultimately, all of that without some sort of ceasefire makes any sort of meeting with Zelensky very, very unlikely.
We appreciate your time this morning, Alexa Drachevich. Thanks for your insight.
Thanks for having me on.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.